Hello everybody, welcome to Chapter 8, and this is called Getting Off to a Fast Start with jQuery. So jQuery is one of those things in web development where it's a library of basically shorthand JavaScript. And you can live life without it, certainly, but it's a nice thing to have in your arsenal as a tool. So as we go through these chapters and coverage of what jQuery is and how it works, we should also know when to use it. So in an age of fast load times and things like that, there's a time and a place for jQuery. And you might like it. I know this, it doesn't hurt you to have it in your resume. There's a lot of sites that use jQuery still for shorthanded animations. So what we're going to do is run through some applications that we've already done with vanilla JS or regular JavaScript and show you the code that would use jQuery instead, so you can make your own decision on whether you think it's worthwhile, whether it's versatile. I find it great for doing things like asynchronous development, which we'll get into. So let's jump in and talk about our objectives as we do each and every week. What we want to do is use jQuery instead of JavaScript to develop common DOM scripting applications. So everything we've done so far, email list, FAQs, image swap, image rollover, we're going to be using jQuery. And in the future weeks, we will be using jQuery effects and animations and things like that. So what we need from you is to understand and be able to describe what jQuery is. And be able to utilize two different methods of including the jQuery library in your websites. So the way jQuery works, it has selectors, almost like CSS and JavaScript, where you select an element. It has methods, which are like functions, and it has event methods as well, like when we did onClick or event listeners in JavaScript. So jQuery's got its own versions of these things that in the end are actual JavaScript. It's just consolidated into shorter syntax. So point 4 here is very apropos. You want to be able to describe the syntax for a jQuery selector, and you'll see that we've been building to it over the last few weeks. We'll also need you to describe the use of the jQuery methods for working with forms and controls. So you've noticed that we've done looping through the DOM for form validation. We're going to be doing the same with jQuery. And we'll have functions, which are methods like val, text, next, submit, and focus. There's going to be a bunch of them. And just like JavaScript, there is object chaining in jQuery. It's just going to be a little bit of a different syntax. So we have a lot of fun methods in jQuery. One of those is toggle class, remove class, and add class. So that's very similar to the work we've been doing in this course, where we, in some cases, toggle the class. We'll show you the FAQs application. That's where we've done that before. So there's next, previous find, attribute, ATTR, CSS. All of these are either methods or properties. In point 8 here, we'll need to be able to describe jQuery event methods. Specifically ready, which is unique to jQuery. It has its traditional click, traditional double click. I had mentioned when we introduced double click that it's hardly ever used. But things like mouse over, mouse out, and hover are all very important parts of jQuery. And lastly, we need to make sure you understand the event object and its current target property. So if you recall, in the past week, we've sent the event to the parameters of a function, and we had event.target. And we're going to show that version of how it works in jQuery. And we've also done prevent default. We've done it specifically on form links, where we don't want the page to refresh or a form to submit. So we use event.prevent default. So now that we've done that, let's just dive in. So there's a jQuery website, and it's at jQuery.com, and I'm going to flash to it real quick, and we'll go to my little browser here, and jQuery.com. Give you a little tour of that real quick. So this is where we would get the content delivery network, which is the remote link to jQuery. So we can download jQuery and include it with our projects, which I'll show you. And we'll also we can also use the jQuery CDN, which I'll show you right now. jQuery CDN. So CDN stands for Content Delivery Network. And all that means is that in our links, what we're going to be doing is adding this. Okay, and we'll get to this in a few slides as well, the sub-resource integrity checking. So when we go back to our presentation here, everything you need, including documentation, is at that jQuery.com site. So when I use jQuery, generally it's usually around the API documentation quite a bit, and occasionally the plugins, and we'll cover all that. You'll find that jQuery does, if you look back at the site, Ajax is much simpler. There's a lot of things that are a little more simple, but you have to understand that you're downloading not too large of a library, but you're adding weight to your web pages when you use jQuery. So the best developers know vanilla JavaScript really well and only use jQuery if it's something that they need. And I'll show you examples of jQuery that I've used professionally, like a store locator, which I've done quite a few of those store locators. And jQuery was perfect for that. It was a jQuery plugin. So, like I said, a lot of this is going to be about getting your hands wet, giving you a portfolio piece that has jQuery, so you have, a full, well-rounded portfolio, and then also, so you have some understanding. You want to be able to utilize this stuff. So, it's got these new selectors, methods, and event methods to make it easier to add JavaScript features to our web pages. So, think animation, think data, think doing whatever JavaScript does, but in a shorter, more compressed amount of code. So it is a lightweight, compressed library that loads quickly, so it doesn't degrade performance, which is good, because once it does degrade performance, then we need to slow down a little bit. And it is cross-browser compatible, and CSS3 are compatible with its selectors. So it's still a relevant tool to be using in your web development arsenal. So this is, I want to go through the FAQs application real quick. So I'm actually going to toggle over there. So if you recall, our FAQs is the same. This is the toggle right here where we had plus minus, and we did it in JavaScript only a week ago. So when we were working on Chapter 7 in the DOM. So let's take a look at the FAQs code now that we understand what it is. So the first thing I want to show you is how do we load jQuery? Well, we use that CDN, and it's usually preferable to have it in the footer, at the bottom of the page. I've seen it occasionally in the header, but you want to have it above the JavaScript that needs it. So when the page loads, right, at this point we've loaded jQuery, and then we have our regular JS that's ours, that we wrote, and this will be able to make sure that this works. So our real work here is this, the FAQs JS. Okay, so first I want to show you this, the document.ready. That's part of jQuery and jQuery only. And what it does is it runs code only after the DOM loads. So once the DOM is completely loaded, that's when this document ready works. So what are we doing? Well, we're finding the FAQs H2. So, and we're applying a click event to it. So if you look, this is how we use a selector in jQuery. And there will be much more on this. You'll see it repetitiously, especially over the next few weeks. But when I come here, remember, we're looking for the FAQs H2. So let's look for the ID called FAQs, which is right here, and the H2. So that's what we're targeting with this line. And when we click that, what we're going to do is make H2 the event current target. So this variable will equal that target, that element. Okay. In fact, we can console.log H2 like so and take a good look at it. So if I go to my console right now, what we've just done is console.log the H2 on FAQs. So when we go here, you see H2 class minus. You see minus and minus, right? So what we're doing is console.logging the event target of whatever H2 got clicked inside the FAQs ID. Now this is the fun method that we want to teach this week, toggle class. So we're going to say toggle class minus, right? So what's happening with this is that we're changing the class. And we're going to say, okay, if the attribute class does not equal minus, then hide it. Otherwise, show it. So H2 next is the next after the H2. It's the same as next element siblings, what it is. So watch this. If I hit refresh, right now it's hidden. Right? Now we click on it, and now it's shown. And now we click on minus again, and it's hidden. So show, hide, show, hide, show, hide. So basically when that happens, that's all we're doing. And we're making sure that even no matter what is clicked, if it's a link, we want to make sure that that event is removed. So we prevent default from having anything else happen like a refresh on the page. Okay. Now the next thing we do is we have the find method. So we're going to be looking for the first H2, or the first anchor of the FAQs ID, and we're going to focus on it. So this is a pseudo selector, and we're finding the anchor, but the first one, and focusing. So if we look at our HTML, right, we're looking for our first anchor right here, and that's where the focus is. So do this. Now notice do this again. Click, 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 click. Hit refresh. Notice how it's focused right there, the blue. So that's how that's done, and it's pretty simple. So what did we just learn? Well, we learned click with an event argument. So that's when any H2 in FAQs ID is clicked. Then we create a constant that equals the event current target. Toggle class was taught. So it's basically turning it on, adding the class minus on one click. The next click we take it away. So that's the toggle class, and a lot goes behind the scenes here. That's JavaScript saying, okay, if this click, then minus. If it's the second click, then remove that class. So we're toggling it and removing it. Now, this is where we do our conditional. So attribute, this finds the attribute, and you just pass the attribute that you want. And this will get the next element and hide it. So that's the text below. In our HTML, that means it's the p tag here, or the div rather. So the div gets hidden. So there's next, previous, but this one is an example of those. So show, hide are the different commands that apply, what we see or what we don't see. So that is our FAQs application. The next thing we're going to do is breeze through all this. This is the document, or this is what we did for the JavaScript, and this is the jQuery that I just showed you. So we've just been to the download page, and if you have jQuery in your project, you would just use a script source. However, I do appreciate the CDN because it's just a nice way of organizing your folders and directories to not have that bulk there. You're still loading the same amount of code. So you're either going to load it from your own server or from the CDN. This right here is the slim version, by the way, which is a minified version. And if we were to go to that, just for kicks, just to show you what it would look like, we see the slim here. That's completely minified. So basically, when they minify something, they remove the character turns and the line breaks. This is actually only one line, which is kind of neat to think about. So what I'm going to do here is view source, and you're going to see that one line. It's actually two, but it's a lot of code in one line, and you can see I scrolled over. This is proof that the minified removes the breaks. So if you wanted to make it more readable, you could actually use a JavaScript beautifier. So minified will remove the line breaks. Beautifier will add the line breaks, so the code's more unique, more legible. So this is all of our code. Let's beautify it, and there's jQuery with the line breaks. Kind of cool. You don't see that version too much. So back to this. So most of the time I prefer the CDN, but you're going to get projects that maybe the client is worried that the CDN is going to go down, and so they package everything locally. So these are the release dates, and as you can see from the top, that August 2006 is a long, long time ago. So we're 15 years in now, as the making of this audio, 15 years plus. So the version 1, you're still going to see a lot of version 1 work out there, because when jQuery came in, it was pretty hot. It was utilized quite a bit, a lot more than it is now. The versions to pay attention to are 3.0, which is the smaller, fastest version. This is the first time they had a minified, and then this is the current version as of last March. And right now, this is recorded, late October, early November 2021. So we've been 7 months without a new release, which is in the past a long time. But really, the versions you want are above version 3. There are migration plugins that you can use. The 1.4.1 restores features dropped by version 1.9, but there were a lot of good features dropped in 1.9. So if you ever needed one, you'd go back to that version. In 3.000, that plugin is going to restore any features that were dropped by version 3.0. So how do you know if something got dropped by 3.0? Well, the documentation in jQuery will tell you, okay? But in our few weeks together with jQuery, we're going to show you enough where you can get pretty much anything done. And the rest is going to be just paying attention to the documentation of what you're doing. And that will tell you if you need those migration plugins. Okay, so SRI, that stands for Sub-Resource Integrity. And when you download a CDN, it's going to give you a SHA-256 code and a cross-origin anonymous keep this. It's going to allow you to make sure the CDN keeps serving you. And it helps them with their analytics because they know who is using it, how many hits they're getting, things like that. So it helps them work with massive amounts of clients and be able to feed up the appropriate code at the right time without fail. So this is one of those developer agreement things where we just should do it. Okay, so we've already seen this in the FAQs application, but the syntax for a jQuery selector is $, and then quotes with the parentheses and whatever the selector is. So we saw hashtag FAQs, hashtag is ID, and the H2 was the second thing. So it was all H2s that are inside the FAQs ID. And in this case, this is our HTML again. We just looked at this. So if we wanted to, get this, we could do $, open parentheses, dot minus. And so that's pretty much how it does. So this is an important slide here. How to select elements by element, ID, and class. So the first one simply grabs the p tag. Just throw the tag in there. If you just do p, you'll get all the p elements themselves, and you'll have to narrow it down to either first or second, things like that you saw in the FAQs app. You can also do the hashtag or the class. Okay, so just like it's very similar to CSS with descendants. If we wanted to get all p tags that are descendants of the main element, we would do hashtag FAQs p, and we did that with the H2. But that is called a descendant because it is a descendant of a parent tag, which is, ID FAQs. The plus, just like CSS, will get you adjacent siblings. So H2 and div that are at the same level of the DOM tree, they're siblings. And they happen to be adjacent. So if we look back at that code, it was H2 with a div. Now, the tilde is for general siblings, where it'll get all paragraph elements that are siblings of UL elements. So they would have to be on the same level of the DOM tree. And lastly, children are used with a greater than symbol. So if a UL is a child of a div, this would get you all of those UL elements that are children of div elements. Now, if we want to grab multiple selectors, we can. We just have to separate them with a comma. So here we have the general siblings and the adjacent siblings together, ULs that are adjacent to B, and P's that are general of div. And then we have this right here, all LIs that are in the hashtag, or the ID FAQs. And this is all P's that are inside div tags. So you can do, commas. You can keep doing commas. You can do 3 selectors, 4, as many as you want. You just have to separate them by commas. Now, we have methods in jQuery just like we do with JavaScript. It's identical. The only thing is it's a little bit different, and the shorthand nomenclature of this will take a little second to get used to. So what I do is I keep the jQuery website open. It's got a great search function where you could find these things, and then you can just look for them, and they'll give you use cases. They'll give you actual practice code that you can see. In fact, let's look for, let's say, submit. Okay, if I'm on the jQuery site and I go to the API documentation, you'll see a search right here, and let's say I do submit. Just to give you an idea of what it looks like. Oops, that was weird, it delayed. But if I do submit here, it says doesn't accept any arguments, and then it gives you an example. So here's target, it was a form, .submit. So when this submits, we're going to run this function. So I really like how jQuery does it. Things are very easy to find. You can see over here what they look like in all these other sections. Whatever here, jQuery deprecated 1.3. All the aspects were deprecated in the corresponding version of jQuery. That's because it's so old. So we'll stick with jQuery 3.6, the latest version, and you'll be okay. So yeah, some of the methods are val, which is for input types, the value of an input type. And there's text, and what they mean by value here is you can change the value. So if I had text empty, I would be grabbing text, but when I put an insert a value here, I'm controlling that text property. We've already seen next, that gets the next element in the HTML. Submit submits a form, and focus puts a cursor inside whatever we're telling it to focus on. So the only difference here, honestly, is value. There's text content for text. Next element sibling. So they shorten some of the methods, and hopefully they, that you grow accustomed and you start enjoying this.